I flinched when a wine glass tapped right above my head, on a balcony that didn't exist last week. I stepped into my backyard and froze, because it wasn't just close, it was hanging over my property like it belonged there. The wood beams creaked softly in the morning heat, and I could see the shadow cutting across my patio table inch by inch. Something about the angle felt wrong. I looked up again and caught a pair of polished shoes pacing slowly above me. That's when I realized someone was standing over my yard like it was theirs. I walked to the fence line, gravel crunching under my boots, and tilted my head back. Derek Halston leaned on the railing, calm, casual, like this was normal. "Nice addition, right?" he said, lifting his glass. His voice echoed down into my space like I was the guest here. I didn't answer. I just stared at where the steel support crossed the invisible line I knew by heart. He noticed the silence. But he didn't move. That told me everything. I stepped closer and felt the shade swallow half my lawn. The sunlight used to hit right there every morning. Now it stopped short, like something had stolen it. I crouched and ran my fingers along the grass where the property marker should be. It was gone. Just dirt, smooth, disturbed. That wasn't an accident. I stood up slower this time. The smell of fresh cut lumber mixed with something chemical, sharp, like rushed construction. I glanced back at the house, then up again. More footsteps now, more voices, laughter. They were already using it. I pulled out my phone and opened the last survey I had saved. The line didn't match what I was seeing, not even close. I zoomed in, then out, then back in again. Something was off, or someone had made it off. I looked up and saw Derek watching me now, not smiling this time, just waiting. That pause felt heavier than the structure above me. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and took a step back, measuring the overhang with my eyes the way I used to on job sites. The clearance didn't make sense, the setback didn't make sense, nothing about it lined up with code, and that's when a memory hit me, fast and sharp, a clause most people never read. 1. That didn't show up on simple permits. I exhaled slowly and glanced at the edge of the balcony again. It wasn't just over my yard, it crossed into something else entirely, something people forget they don't own. Derek raised his glass again like he'd already won. I just nodded once, like I agreed, because at that moment, I realized he hadn't built it in the wrong place. He built it in the one place that could take everything down. I did not look up again after that nod, because I already knew what I needed to know. I walked back across the yard slowly, each step deliberate, feeling the uneven ground where the marker used to sit. The grass brushed against my boots, dry and warm, but the air felt heavier than it should have. Something had shifted, not just the structure, but the rules around it. I reached the back door and paused with my hand on the handle. The faint creak of that balcony followed me, like it was settling into place. That sound did not belong here. I stepped inside and closed the door, muting the laughter outside to a dull echo. The house smelled like coffee and dust, familiar, steady, unchanged. That mattered more than anything. I set my keys on the counter and pulled out the original survey file from the drawer where I kept everything that actually counted. The paper was worn at the edges, but the lines were clean, exact, permanent. I laid it flat and traced the boundary with my finger. I had walked that line more times than I could count. Something was wrong out there, but it was not the land. I grabbed my tablet and opened the county records. Permits, zoning, approvals, everything Derek would have used to make that structure look legitimate. The file loaded slower than usual, like it was dragging its feet. I tapped through the documents one by one, stamped approvals, digital signatures, inspection notes. All of it looked clean, too clean. I zoomed in on the site plan and compared it to my survey. The lines almost matched, but not quite. There was a slight shift, just enough to push that balcony over my boundary. That was not a mistake. Nobody shifts a line like that by accident. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the screen. If the land line was altered, it would show somewhere else, something tied to elevation, or clearance, or space above. I pulled up the zoning code next. Most people never read it past the basics. I used to read it for a living. I scrolled past the usual sections until I found what I was looking for: setback requirements, structural overhang limits, and then the line most people skip: airspace encroachment. I stopped there. The words sat on the screen like they had been waiting. Structures cannot extend beyond property boundaries into adjacent airspace without explicit recorded easement. I read it twice, then a third time. Derek had permits, yes, but permits follow submitted plans, and plans can lie. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the edge of the balcony through the glass. From this angle, it was obvious. The overhang was not just crossing the line on the ground, it was claiming the air above it. That was not something you could just approve with a checkbox. That required a signed agreement, recorded, filed, undeniable. I went back to the tablet and searched for any easement tied to my property. Nothing came up, not one document, not one note, not even a reference. That silence was louder than anything outside. I felt my jaw tighten, not from anger, but from certainty. Derek had built something that could not legally exist. And he had done it in the one way that would make it impossible to ignore once someone noticed. I glanced back outside again. The shadows had shifted further across my yard. The line between light and dark was sharper now. That boundary mattered, more than he realized. I picked up my phone and hovered over a number I had not called in years, someone who still worked inspections, someone who would see it the same way I did. I did not press call yet, not until I was sure of one thing. I stepped back outside, the noise hitting me again, louder now, more confident. Derek was still up there, leaning against that railing like it was permanent. I walked to the exact spot where the shadow cut across the grass and looked straight up. From here, the edge of the balcony lined up perfectly with the invisible line in my head. No guesswork, no doubt, just a clean, silent violation hanging in the air. I let the moment sit, just long enough to feel it settle, then I turned back toward the house, already knowing what the next move had to be. I did not wait long after stepping back inside, because waiting was how people lost ground without noticing. I grabbed my jacket, the fabric still carrying the faint smell of sawdust from last winter, and headed straight for the truck. The engine turned over with a low rumble, steady, familiar, grounding. Outside, the balcony cast a longer shadow now, stretching across my yard like it had always been there. That was the problem. It almost looked normal. I pulled out onto the street and kept my eyes forward, but I could feel it behind me, something that should not exist, pretending it did. The city buildings sat quiet this time of day, glass reflecting the afternoon sun in sharp angles. I parked and stepped out, the heat rising off the pavement in waves. Inside, the air was cooler, stale, filled with paper and old carpet. The front desk clerk barely looked up. I signed in and asked for the permit file tied to Derek Halston's property. She typed slowly, keys clicking one at a time. Something about that delay made me watch closer. The file came up, neat, complete, approved. Of course it did. I thanked her and moved to the side desk, flipping through digital pages on the public terminal, plans, elevations, load calculations, all stamped, all official. Too smooth again. I zoomed in on the elevation drawing and paused. The balcony line stopped just short of the boundary on paper, just short. I leaned closer, narrowing my eyes. The printed dimension was clean, precise, but the scaling felt off. I pulled up the measurement tool and dragged it across the screen. The number did not match what was written, not even close. I checked again, same result. The plan said one thing, the drawing showed another. That was not a rounding error, that was intent. I sat back slowly, letting that settle. Whoever submitted this knew exactly where the line was, and they knew exactly how to hide crossing it. I opened the inspection log next. Final approval, signed 3 days ago. Inspector name listed, but no field notes attached. That was unusual. There were always notes, always. I tapped the entry again, expecting something to load. Nothing did, just a blank space where details should be. That silence said more than words. I copied the inspector's name and stood up. The clerk glanced over as I passed. I kept walking. Outside, the light had shifted, softer now, but the heat still clung to the ground. I leaned against the truck and dialed the number I had hovered over earlier. It rang twice before a voice answered, older, steady, someone who had seen enough to know when something did not add up. I gave him the address, the permit number, the inspector name. There was a pause on the line, not confusion, not hesitation, recognition. He told me he would check something and call back. That was all. I ended the call and stared across the street at nothing in particular. A car passed, tires hissing softly on the asphalt. Everything looked ordinary, but it was not. I got back in the truck and drove home slower this time, not because I was unsure, but because I was certain. The balcony came back into view before I turned into the driveway. It looked bigger now, heavier, like it had settled deeper into the wrong place. Voices drifted down again, casual, unaware. I stepped out and stood at the edge of my yard, exactly where the shadow met the light. The line was still there, invisible but sharp. I looked up and traced the edge of the structure with my eyes, matching it to the numbers I had just seen. Nothing lined up, not the plan, not the measurements, not the approval. It was all just close enough to pass, unless someone checked twice. I heard my phone buzz in my hand. I did not answer right away. I already knew what that call meant. I looked up one more time at the balcony stretching over space it never had the right to touch. Then I accepted the call and listened as the first real crack started to show. I answered without taking my eyes off the balcony, because I needed to hear it while looking at the problem. His voice came through low and steady, the way it always did when something was not right. He did not start with greetings, he went straight to the point. The inspector listed on that approval had not signed off on that structure. I felt my grip tighten around the phone. That was not a small detail, that was the detail. I asked him to say it again. He did, slower this time. The signature was real, but the approval was not logged in their internal system. That meant the file existed, but the process did not. Something had been pushed through without the final step. I looked up again at the clean lines of the railing, the polished finish, the people moving casually above it. None of it looked rushed, none of it looked fake. That was the unsettling part. It was built to feel permanent. I thanked him and ended the call, but the silence after felt louder than the conversation. I stood there a second longer, letting the weight of that sink in. The structure was not just over my space, it was standing on something that should not hold it. I slipped the phone into my pocket and walked toward the fence line again. Each step felt slower, more deliberate. I stopped at the exact point where the shadow cut across the grass and tilted my head up. From here, the underside of the balcony told a different story. The support beam closest to my side was angled slightly, almost unnoticeable unless you knew what to look for. I narrowed my eyes and traced it from the base to the edge. It did not line up with the load distribution shown in the plans. Not even close. I stepped back and looked at the whole structure again. It was balanced on a lie. That thought stayed with me longer than it should have. I heard footsteps above me again. Derek's voice drifted down, light, confident, like none of this could touch him. I did not respond. I did not need to. I turned and walked back inside, the cool air hitting my face as the door shut behind me. The house felt quieter now, almost waiting. I went straight to the table and opened the file again. Permit, plan, approval. I lined them up side by side. Everything matched just enough to pass, just enough to avoid questions. But now I had a gap, a missing step. I circled the approval date with my finger. 3 days ago, too recent, too fast. I opened the inspection schedule logs next. The date listed did not match any assigned route for that inspector. It was a ghost entry. I sat back slowly, letting that settle. Someone had forced this through, not just bent the rules, but skipped them. I looked toward the window again. The light outside had shifted lower, the shadow stretching deeper into my yard. It reached the back steps now. That had never happened before. I stood up and walked to the glass, watching the line move inch by inch. It was subtle, but it was there, a physical reminder of what had been taken. I reached for my phone again and pulled up the contact for the city compliance office. I did not call yet, not until I had something they could not ignore. I moved to the side cabinet and pulled out the old laser measure I had not used in years. The weight of it felt familiar in my hand. I stepped back outside and set it on the ground, aligning it with the original survey point I had memorized. The red line cut through the air, straight and unforgiving. It hit the edge of the balcony and stopped. I checked the reading twice, then a third time. The number was not even close to legal clearance, not by inches, by feet. I lowered the device slowly, feeling something shift into place in my mind. This was not just an overhang. This was a violation that could not be corrected quietly. I looked up again, catching Derek's silhouette against the fading light. He leaned on that railing like it was untouchable. I let the silence sit between us for a moment, then I turned off the laser and stepped back, already knowing this was about to move beyond a simple dispute. I did not wait for the night to settle before making the first move, because delays give people time to cover tracks. I went back inside, set the laser on the table, and opened the compliance portal on my laptop. The screen flickered once before loading, like it already knew this was not going to be simple. I filled out the report carefully, line by line, attaching the measurements, the survey, the permit discrepancies. Nothing emotional, just facts. Facts tend to hold longer. I hovered over the submit button for a second, not out of doubt, but because I knew what this would trigger. Then I clicked, the confirmation popped up instantly, too clean, too fast, that made me pause. Most reports sit, they queue, they wait, this one did not. I refreshed the page, status changed to under review within seconds. That was not normal. I leaned back slowly, watching the screen like it might change again. It did not. I closed the laptop and listened. Outside, the balcony was still alive with movement, glasses clinked, voices overlapped, a chair scraped lightly across wood. It sounded settled, established, like it had always been there. That illusion was strong. I stepped back outside, the air cooler now, carrying the faint scent of cut grass from somewhere down the block. The shadow from the balcony stretched deeper across my yard, touching the back door now. That line had moved again. I walked along it slowly, toe to heel, measuring it without the device this time. Just memory. Just instinct. It still did not belong. I stopped near the fence and looked up. Derek leaned over slightly, resting his forearms on the railing. He looked relaxed, almost bored. "You measuring again?" he called down, voice light. I did not answer right away. I let the silence sit there, just long enough. Then I looked up and met his eyes. "Just checking something," I said. Simple, flat. His smile tightened for a second, barely noticeable. Then it came back. That flicker mattered more than the words. I turned and walked back toward the house without another word. I could feel his eyes on my back the whole way. Inside, the quiet felt different now, not calm, but waiting. I checked my phone, no updates yet. Too soon. I set it down and poured a glass of water, the tap running a little longer than needed. The sound filled the space, steady, neutral, something to cut through the noise outside. I leaned against the counter and stared at the reflection in the window. The balcony edge cut across it at an angle that should not exist, even from inside. It looked wrong. I picked up the phone again. Still nothing. That was expected. What was not expected was how fast the report had moved earlier. That stuck with me. I opened the email confirmation and read it again. Assigned reviewer already listed, timestamp within seconds of submission. I recognized the name, not personally, but from the permit file. Same department that approved the structure. That connection tightened something in my chest. This was not going to be a straight line. I set the phone down and walked back outside one more time. The voices above had quieted now, replaced by the soft hum of outdoor lights clicking on. The balcony glowed faintly, casting a sharper edge across my yard. Light and shadow split the grass in a way that felt deliberate. I stepped into the darker half and looked up. From here, the underside details were clearer. Bolts, brackets, the alignment of the beam. The flaw was still there, subtle, but real. I could see where the load shifted just enough to strain the wrong point. Not dangerous yet, but not stable either. I let that observation sit. Not everything needs to be rushed. Some things work better when they are forced into the open. I took a slow breath and stepped back into the light, letting my eyes adjust again. The contrast sharpened everything. I glanced at Derek's place, windows lit, movement inside, silhouettes passing by. Everything looked normal from a distance. That was the problem. I reached into my pocket as my phone vibrated again, a short pulse this time. I looked down at the screen and saw a new update, but the wording was not what I expected. I unlocked my phone and read the update twice before it made sense, because it did not say investigation started. It said no violation found. The word sat there flat and final, like someone had already closed the door. I felt my jaw tighten, not from surprise, but from recognition. This was not a review, this was a dismissal. I looked up at the balcony again, the soft glow from above making it look even more permanent. That contrast did not sit right. I scrolled down the report details and saw the reviewer name again, same department, same chain as the approval. That was not coincidence. I stepped back into the house and closed the door slower this time, letting the quiet settle around me. The hum of the lights outside faded into a dull echo. I set the phone on the table and stared at the screen. No violation found meant they had not measured. It meant they had not looked. I picked up the laser again and ran my thumb along the edge, cold, precise, honest. It did not care about approvals or signatures. It only showed what was there. I walked back to the window and watched the line of shadow cut across the floor inside now. That had never happened before. The boundary had moved without permission. I turned back to the table and opened the permit file. Again, slower this time. Every page, every note, every stamp, I was not looking for mistakes anymore, I was looking for intent. The elevation drawing came up again and I zoomed in further than before. The printed dimension sat clean, centered, but the scale bar in the corner told a different story. I dragged the measurement tool across it again. The ratio was off, not random, not sloppy, calculated. Someone had adjusted the scale just enough to hide the extension. I leaned back and let that sit. This was not just a shortcut, this was design. I reached for my phone and pulled up the original county plat map, the one that never changes. I overlaid it mentally with what I had seen outside. The edge of that balcony crossed the line by more than a foot, not inches, not something you could argue away. I stood up and walked back outside, the night air cooler now, carrying a faint metallic smell from the structure above. Lights from the balcony cast sharp lines across the yard, making the violation easier to see. Sometimes darkness reveals more than daylight. I stepped to the exact point where the beam angled down and looked straight up. The bracket closest to my side had a slight twist, small, but real, load shifting where it should not. I narrowed my eyes and followed the line back to the house. It did not align with the support column shown in the plans. That gap told a story. I heard Derek's footsteps again, slower this time. He moved to the edge and looked down at me. "Still at it?" he asked, voice calm, almost amused. I did not answer right away. I let the silence stretch just enough. Then I lifted the laser and pointed it at the edge. The red line cut through the air and stopped at the overhang. The number lit up clear on the screen. I did not say it, I just let it hang there. His eyes flicked to the device, then back to me. Something shifted in his expression, quick, almost hidden. That flicker mattered. I lowered the laser and slipped it back into my pocket. "You should double-check your paperwork," I said, simple, flat, no accusation, no edge, just a statement. He held my gaze for a second longer than before, then he smiled again, but it did not reach his eyes this time. That told me enough. I turned and walked back toward the house, feeling the weight of the next step settle in. Inside, I picked up the phone and opened the report again. No violation found still sat there, unchanged. I tapped the appeal option and read the requirements. Additional evidence, third-party verification, formal request, more steps, more layers, designed to slow things down. I closed the app and set the phone down. This was not going to move through their system. Not the way it was set up now. I looked toward the window again, the shadow line steady across the floor. It was not going anywhere on its own. I reached for the contact list and scrolled past the city numbers. There were other ways to force a measurement, ways that did not rely on the same chain that approved it. I stopped on a name I had not used in years, someone who did not sit behind a desk, someone who showed up in person. I hovered for a second, then pressed call. The line rang once. Then twice. I could hear the faint echo of laughter outside again, like nothing had changed. That contrast sharpened everything. The call connected, and before I said anything, I knew this was about to step outside the system they thought controlled it. The line clicked and a voice answered that did not waste time on small talk, the kind that listened before speaking and measured before judging. I gave him the address, the overhang, the numbers I had pulled, and then I stopped talking. Silence stretched for a second on the other end, not empty, just processing. He asked one question, simple, direct. "Does it cross your airspace?" I looked out the window at the sharp edge cutting through my yard and said yes. Another pause, shorter this time. "Then it is not a zoning issue," he said. "It is a boundary violation with structural implications." That phrasing mattered. Zoning can be argued, boundaries cannot. I stepped outside again while still on the call, the cool air hitting my face as the lights above flickered slightly in the breeze. I described the beam angle, the missing marker, the mismatch in the plans. He did not interrupt. When I finished, he told me he would come by in the morning. Not to inspect officially, just to look. That distinction mattered more than it sounded. I ended the call and stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle around the words he chose. Structural implications. That phrase did not leave room for opinions. It dealt in weight, load, and failure points. I looked up again at the balcony, the polished railing catching the light like it was meant to impress. But now I could not unsee the slight shift in the beam, the misalignment hidden behind. Clean edges. Once you see it, it stays. Footsteps moved above me again, slower now, less confident. Derek stepped into view, hands resting on the railing. He did not speak this time. He just watched. That was new. I tilted my head slightly, studying the way the structure held him. the way the load transferred through that angled support, it looked fine at a glance. It always does. I turned and walked back inside without saying anything. Words would only give him something to push against. Inside, I cleared the table and spread out everything I had gathered: survey, plat map, permit file, measurements. I arranged them in a line, each piece pointing to the same conclusion from a different angle. It was not about proving it anymore, it was about making it undeniable. I checked the time, early evening, enough daylight left to confirm one more thing. I grabbed the laser again and stepped back outside, positioning it at a slightly different angle this time. The red line cut through the air and traced along the underside of the balcony, revealing the slight dip near the outer edge, small, but real. I adjusted the angle and measured again. The number changed just enough to confirm what I was seeing. Load was shifting outward, not down where it should. That meant the support was compensating for something it was not designed to carry. I lowered the device slowly, letting that settle. This was no longer just about space, it was about integrity. I glanced toward Derek's house. The lights were brighter now, casting longer shadows across the yard. Silhouettes moved inside, but no one stepped back out onto the balcony. That absence felt louder than the earlier noise. I went back inside and set the laser down carefully. Tools matter when they tell the truth. I picked up my phone and checked the report again. Still closed, still dismissed. It almost looked final, almost. I opened the appeal screen one more time and read through the requirements again, slower this time. Third-party verification stood out. Not internal, not assigned, not controlled by the same chain. That was the opening. I closed the app and leaned back, staring at the ceiling where the shadow line now cut across in a place it never had before. The house felt different under that line, like something was pressing down from above. I let that feeling sit for a moment, not pushing it away. It was a reminder of what was actually at stake. Not just property, but control over the space you live in. I stood up and walked to the window again, watching the stillness outside. No movement on the balcony now, no voices. Just the structure itself, quiet, solid, wrong. I reached for my keys and set them on the counter again, a habit I did not break even when things shifted. Routine keeps things clear. My phone buzzed once more in my hand, a short vibration that did not match the earlier notifications. I looked down and saw a new message, not from the city, not from the system, but from the man who said he would just take a look, and the wording told me this was about to become something much bigger. I opened the message and read it once, then again slower, because the wording was careful, almost too careful. Do not file anything else yet. Let me see it in person first. I stood there for a second, phone in hand, listening to the quiet outside press against the windows. That was not hesitation, that was strategy. I stepped back to the table and gathered everything into one stack, neat, aligned, ready. When someone like him asks to see it, you do not give half the picture, you give all of it. I checked the time again, then set an alarm earlier than I needed. Something told me morning would not wait. I moved through the house slower now, shutting off lights one by one, but the glow from outside still slipped through the blinds. That line on the floor had shifted again. It reached deeper into the room, sharper at the edges. I paused there, watching it stretch. Shadows do not lie, they just follow what is already wrong. I went to bed but did not sleep right away. Every small sound carried more weight than it should. A faint creak from outside, a soft tap like something settling. That balcony was still adjusting. Structures always do. The question is what they adjust to. I closed my eyes for a moment, replaying the measurements, the angles, the misalignment. Each piece clicked into place. Again, tighter this time. This was not going to hold up under scrutiny. It just needed the right kind of scrutiny. The alarm cut through the quiet earlier than expected, sharp, immediate. I was already awake. I got up, pulled on a jacket, and stepped outside before the sun fully cleared the horizon. The air was colder now, clean, carrying a faint metallic edge from the structure above. Morning light hit the balcony at a different angle, exposing things the night hid. The underside looked flatter from here, but the beam still carried that slight twist. It had not corrected overnight. It never would. I set the laser on the ground again and ran one quick measurement. Same number. That consistency mattered. I straightened up as I heard a vehicle slow down on the street, tires rolling over gravel, then stopping. I did not turn right away. I let the moment settle first. Then I looked. A plain truck, no markings, no official seal. The driver stepped out, older, steady, eyes already scanning the structure before he even closed the door. He did not rush, he never did. He walked up beside me and followed my line of sight without asking. That told me enough. Show me, he said. No greeting, no small talk. I handed him the laser and pointed to the edge. He took one measurement, then another from a different angle. He did not react, not outwardly, but his second reading took longer. That was the first sign. He stepped back and looked up, tracing the beam with his eyes the same way I had. Then he moved a few feet to the side and checked again. Different angle, same problem. He lowered the device slowly and handed it back. It crosses, he said, simple, flat, not a guess, not an opinion. A statement. I felt something settle in my chest, not relief, not yet, just confirmation. He walked a few steps along the yard, stopping at the point where the shadow cut across the grass. He crouched down and brushed the dirt where the marker should have been. His fingers paused there a second longer than needed, then he stood up again. They moved this, he said. Not a question. I looked toward the house next door. Still quiet. No movement on the balcony. That silence felt different now. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket and wrote something down, quick, precise. Not for records, not yet, just for memory. He closed it and slipped it back without another word. I waited, not asking. When he speaks, it matters more if you let him choose when. He looked up one more time at the structure, then back at me. This is not just over your line, he said slowly, like he was choosing each word. This is built on a false reference point. That phrase landed heavier than anything before. False reference point meant everything tied to it was wrong, not just the edge, not just the beam, everything. I glanced at the balcony again, the clean lines, the solid finish, the confidence it projected. It all rested on something that did not exist. I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket again, but I did not check it yet. Some messages can wait. This moment could not. He took one step back, still looking up, and then finally said the one thing that changed how this was going to unfold. He did not rush the words, which made them land heavier than anything else he had said so far. If the reference point is wrong, he said, still looking up at the structure, then every measurement tied to it is wrong too. I felt that settle deeper than the earlier confirmations. This was not just a line crossing anymore, it was the entire build sitting on something invalid. I glanced at the beam again, then back at him. So what does that mean? I asked. He did not answer right away. Instead, he walked a few steps closer to the house and studied where the support connected back to Derek's wall. His eyes moved slowly, tracing each joint, each bracket, each point where weight transferred. When he finally spoke, his voice stayed low, steady. It means this cannot be corrected with an adjustment. That phrasing mattered. Not adjusted, not modified. Cannot be corrected. I let that sit for a second. The morning light had shifted higher now, exposing more of the underside. Every angle looked cleaner in daylight, but the flaw was still there. It always would be. He stepped back again and looked at me directly this time. If this gets reviewed properly, he continued, they will not measure just the overhang. I felt my grip tighten slightly around the laser. That was not where this ended. They will go back to the base, he added. That changed everything. Going back to the base meant tearing through every assumption the build relied on. I exhaled slowly, feeling the air settle in my chest. This was bigger than I first thought. I glanced toward Derek's place again. Still no movement outside, windows closed, curtains drawn. That quiet felt deliberate now. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, checking the earlier message again. Do not file anything else yet. It made more sense now. This was not about speed. It was about forcing the right kind of review. I looked back at him. What do we need? I asked. Simple, direct. He nodded once, like he had already mapped it out. Independent verification, he said, something they cannot dismiss as internal, that aligned with what I had seen in the appeal requirements. But this would carry more weight. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded card, handing it to me. The name on it was not from the city, not tied to permits or approvals. Private structural certification, that meant a different path. I turned the card over once, then back again. The paper felt heavier than it should. He watched me for a second, then added quietly, once that report exists, they cannot ignore it. That was the leverage. Not a complaint, not a request, a document that forced a response. I slipped the card into my pocket and looked back up at the balcony. It still looked solid from a distance. Still carried that sense of permanence. But now I could see past that, the misalignment, the shifted load, the false reference. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. I felt my phone buzz again in my hand. This time I checked it, a new update from the compliance portal. I opened it and read the line slowly. Case closed, no further action required. I let out a short breath through my nose. Of course it was. That system had already decided. I locked the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. This was no longer about their system. I looked back at him. He had already stepped away a few feet. Like his part here was done, but I knew better. People like him do not step in unless it matters. I gave a small nod. Not thanks, not yet, just acknowledgement. He returned at once and headed back toward his truck without another word. No instructions, no follow-up, just the path already laid out. I stood there alone again, the morning light now fully on the structure. The shadow had pulled back slightly, but the line was still clear. It always would be. I reached into my pocket and felt the card again, edges sharp against my fingers. This was the next step, not fast, not loud, but precise. I turned toward the house and walked back inside, already thinking through what that report would need to show, measurements, load paths, reference points, everything tied back to one flaw. I set the laser down on the table and picked up the phone again, opening a new contact screen. The number on the card sat there waiting. I hesitated for just a second, not from doubt, but from timing. Once this started, it would not stop halfway. I glanced out the window one more time at the balcony, quiet now, almost still. Then I pressed call, knowing this was about to force something Derek could not smooth over. The call did not ring long before someone picked up, and the voice on the other end sounded sharp, alert, like they already knew this would not be routine. I gave the address, kept it simple, then added one detail that mattered. The reference point is wrong. There was a pause, not confusion, just calculation. Send me everything, they said. No hesitation, no small talk. I ended the call and moved fast, pulling every file into one folder. Scans, photos, measurements, even the rough notes I had scribbled earlier, nothing polished, just real. I sent it all in one push and watched the upload bar crawl across the screen. It felt slower than it should. Outside, the morning had fully settled in, light hitting the balcony from a higher angle now. It looked cleaner, almost flawless. That contrast kept bothering me. I stepped to the window while the files finished sending and studied the structure again. The beam still held that slight twist. The edge still crossed where it should not. Nothing had changed, but everything felt different. My phone buzzed before the upload even completed. A reply, faster than expected. I am on my way. I stared at the message for a second, then looked outside again. 2 visits in one morning. That was not normal. I grabbed the laser and stepped back out, checking the line again, just to be sure. Same reading, same number, no shift. Consistency like that does not lie. A car turned onto the street a few minutes later, slower this time, deliberate. Different from the first. This one was marked, not city, not county, private. The driver stepped out with a case in hand, not large, but precise. They did not look at me first, they looked at the structure. That told me enough. I walked over and handed them the printed survey without saying anything. They glanced at it once, then back up at the balcony. Show me where it crosses, they said. I pointed to the exact line where the shadow had been cutting through my yard since yesterday. They set their case down and opened it, pulling out tools I had not seen used in years, more exact than mine, more unforgiving. The first measurement took seconds, the second took longer, the third even longer. Each angle told the same story, just from a different side. They stood still for a moment after that, not writing yet, just looking. I recognized that pause. It meant the numbers were already clear. They walked closer to the base, checking the alignment where the support met the house. Their hand hovered near the bracket but did not touch it, just close enough to feel the space. This was built off a shifted baseline. They said quietly, same conclusion, different voice. That made it heavier. I felt my shoulders settle slightly, not relief, not yet, just confirmation stacking on confirmation. They stepped back and finally pulled out a small pad, writing quick, precise notes, no wasted motion. Every line mattered. I glanced toward Derek's house again, still quiet, still closed, but the stillness felt thinner now, like it could break at any moment. I heard a faint movement above, a step, then another, slow, cautious. Someone was listening. I kept my focus forward. This was Not the moment to look up. The inspector finished the notes and straightened, eyes still on the structure. This is not compliant, they said, simple, direct. But then they added something else, something that changed the weight of it, and it cannot be made compliant without removing it. I felt that land harder than anything before, not adjusted, not corrected, removed. I nodded once, slow. The air felt different after that, sharper, clearer. They closed the case and handed me a card, similar to the one I already had, but this one carried a different authority. I will file the report today, they said. Once it is logged, it forces a response. There it was again, force, not request, not review, response. I took the card and slipped it into my pocket, feeling the edges press against my hand. I looked back at the balcony one more time. It still stood there, unchanged, solid, confident. But now I knew it was already failing in ways no one above it could see. I turned slightly, catching a glimpse of movement at the railing. Derek, just for a second, then gone again. That flicker told me he had heard enough. I stayed where I was, letting the silence stretch after the words that had just been said, because once that report went in, nothing about this would stay quiet any longer. The report did not take long to move, but it did not move quietly either. I heard the first sign before I saw anything change, a car door closing harder than it needed to down the street. I stepped outside and felt the shift immediately. The air carried tension now, not just the usual morning stillness. The balcony above me was empty for the first time since it went up. That alone said enough. I looked toward Derek's house and saw the front door open, then close again quickly, movement inside. Faster than before. Something had reached him. I checked my phone and saw the notification come through, official this time, external structural review submitted and flagged for immediate assessment. That wording mattered. Flagged meant it bypassed the normal queue. I let out a slow breath and looked back up at the structure. It still stood the same, but it did not feel untouchable anymore. I heard footsteps approach from behind and turned slightly. A city vehicle rolled up this time, marked unmistakable, not the same department as before, different chain. That was the point. 2 inspectors stepped out, clipboards already in hand, eyes locked on the balcony before they even acknowledged me. That told me everything about what they had been sent. I stepped aside without saying anything. They did not need my version anymore. The report spoke for itself. One of them walked straight to the boundary line, glancing down at the ground, then up at the overhang. The other circled toward the base, checking the support connection against the wall. Their movements were efficient, practiced, no hesitation. I watched the first inspector pull out a measuring device and align it carefully with the property line. The red beam cut upward and stopped at the edge. The number flashed. He checked it again, then again from a different angle. Consistency. That always mattered. The second inspector called something out quietly, pointing to the bracket near the support. I could not hear the exact words, but the tone was enough. It was not approval. I glanced toward Derek's place again. The front door opened wider this time. He stepped out, slower than usual, eyes moving between the inspectors and the structure above. His confidence looked thinner now, not gone, but strained. He walked toward them with a measured pace, trying to keep control of the moment. I stayed where I was. This was not my conversation anymore. One of the inspectors held up a hand slightly as Derek started to speak. Not dismissive, just firm. Procedure over personality. That line held. I saw Derek glance up at the balcony, then back down at the inspector's notes. His jaw tightened for a second, small, but real. They continued measuring, checking, comparing against the documents they had brought. Everything aligned with what I already knew, nothing aligned with what had been approved. One of them flipped a page on the clipboard and made a note, pressing the pen harder than needed. That detail stuck with me. Pressure shows in small ways. I heard a faint creak from the structure as the morning heat shifted across it. The beam held, but the sound carried differently now, like it was being listened to. The inspectors stepped back together, speaking quietly between themselves. I caught a few words this time: reference, deviation, non-compliant. Each one landed exactly where it should. Derek stood a few feet away, hands at his sides now, no longer resting on the railing. That change mattered more than anything he could say. One of the inspectors turned toward him and spoke in a tone that did not invite argument. I could not hear the full sentence, but I saw the reaction. His shoulders dropped just enough, not defeat, but realization. I looked up at the balcony again, the clean lines, the polished edges, the illusion of permanence. it still looked the same, but now it was surrounded by something it could not hide from. I felt my phone vibrate once more in my pocket, a short pulse. I did not check it yet. Some confirmations can wait. I kept my eyes on the structure as the inspectors finished their notes and stepped back toward their vehicle. One of them paused at the edge of the yard and looked up one last time, longer than before, then he nodded once, almost to himself. That was the moment. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet certainty settling in. I slipped my hands into my pockets and stood there, feeling the shift move through the space around me. The line had not changed, the structure had not moved, but the outcome had started to lock into place. I glanced toward Derek one more time. He was still standing there, staring up at what he built, like he was seeing it differently for the first time. And that was when I knew this was no longer about whether it crossed the line. The inspectors did not leave empty-handed, and they did not leave quietly either. One of them returned from the vehicle holding a printed notice, not folded, not delayed, already prepared. That alone told me how this had escalated. He walked back across the yard with steady steps and stopped just short of Derek, holding the paper out without any extra words. Derek hesitated before taking it, just for a second, like he already knew what it said. That pause was the first real crack. The paper shifted in his hand as he read, his eyes moving faster than before, then slowing, then stopping altogether. I did not need to see the text to understand it. I had seen enough of these to know the structure of it: immediate non-compliance, structural violation, and the part that always mattered most, required action. I felt the air shift again, lighter in one place, heavier in another. The inspector pointed once toward the balcony, then down at the ground where the boundary line ran. No raised voice, no emphasis, just direction. Derek nodded once, but it was not agreement, it was acknowledgement. Those are not the same. The second inspector added a few words, quieter, but I caught enough. Timeline, reassessment, removal, each one landed clean. I looked up at the balcony again, the sunlight now hitting it fully, exposing every clean edge, every polished surface. It still looked complete, still looked finished. But now it carried a deadline it could not ignore. I heard a faint sound above, a small shift in the wood, almost like it was settling under its own weight. That detail stayed with me. Structures respond to pressure in ways people do not see. The inspectors stepped back toward their vehicle. Their job here already done. They did not wait for a reaction. They did not need one. The process had already moved forward. Derek stood there a moment longer, still holding the paper, still looking at it like it might change if he read it again. It did not. I watched him fold it once, then unfold it again, slower this time. That motion said more than anything else. He looked up at the balcony, then back down at the ground, then finally toward me. Not anger, not yet, something closer to calculation. That look held for a second, then shifted away. He turned and walked back toward his house without another word. The door closed behind him harder than before. I stood where I was, letting the quiet settle in after everything that had just happened. No voices above now, no footsteps, no movement, just the structure itself, still, silent, waiting. I stepped forward slightly and looked up again. Tracing the same line I had followed from the beginning, the overhang still crossed it. Unchanged, the beam still carried that slight twist. Nothing physical had moved, but everything around it had. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, checking the latest update. The system had not caught up yet, still showed closed, still showed no action required. That delay almost felt irrelevant now. The real movement was happening outside of it. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and walked along the edge of the shadow, watching where it fell now. The line had shifted again. With the sun, pulling back toward the fence, temporary, but predictable, unlike the structure itself, I stopped at the point where the marker used to be and looked down at the bare dirt. It still had not been replaced. That absence mattered more now than it did before. I crouched slightly and pressed my hand into the soil, feeling the uneven surface where something had been removed, not by accident. That thought stayed with me. I stood back up slowly and looked toward Derek's house again. The windows were closed, blinds drawn, no sign of movement inside, but that did not mean stillness. It meant planning. I knew that pattern. People like him do not accept outcomes without looking for a way around them. I let that sit for a moment, not pushing it away. This was not finished, not yet. I turned back toward the house and took a few steps, then stopped again. Something felt off. Not wrong, just unfinished. I glanced up one more time at the balcony, the edges sharp in the midday light. It still held its shape, still looked like it belonged, but now it carried something else, something it could not hide from. I took a slow breath and stepped back, knowing the next move would not come from me, but it would not take long either. The next morning did not start with noise, it started with absence. No footsteps above, no shifting wood, no low hum of voices trying to pretend nothing had changed. I stepped outside and felt it immediately, the air lighter, clearer, like something had already been decided. The balcony still stood there, but it no longer felt settled, it felt temporary. I walked to the edge of my yard and looked up. Tracing the same line I had followed from the beginning, the overhang still crossed it. Unchanged, but now it carried a different weight, not ownership, not control, just time. I heard a truck pull up again, heavier this time, engine idling longer than usual. I turned and saw a crew step out, not inspectors, not officials, workers. Their movements were quiet, focused, no small talk. That told me everything. I stepped back without saying a word and watched. They did not look at me, they did not need to. They looked at the structure. One of them pointed to the beam, then to the edge. Then back to the base, short motions, precise. They knew exactly where to start. I felt the first sound before I saw the movement, a low mechanical whir, then a pause, then the first section shifted slightly, almost imperceptible unless you were watching for it. I did not move, I did not need to, the process had already begun. I glanced toward Derek's house. The door was open this time, but he stayed inside the frame, not stepping out, not speaking, just watching. That distance said more than anything he could have said yesterday. I looked back at the balcony as the crew worked methodically, loosening what had been fixed in place, each adjustment small, controlled, but final. The structure responded in subtle ways, slight changes in tension, a faint release in the beam. It was no longer resisting, it was giving. I stepped along the shadow line again, noticing how it pulled back faster now as sections shifted. The light reclaimed space inch by inch. That detail stayed with me. The yard looked different with every minute that passed. I could hear tools engage, stop, adjust, then engage again. No rush, no hesitation, just sequence. I watched the edge where it crossed my boundary, the exact point that started all of this. The line was still there, invisible, unchanged, but now the structure above it was not. I felt my phone vibrate once in my pocket, but I did not check it. I already knew what it would say. I kept my eyes on the process, on the way each piece separated from what it had been attached to, the illusion of permanence fading with each step. I glanced toward Derek again. He had stepped out slightly now, but not fully, his posture different. Shoulders lower, hands no longer steady on the frame. He watched the same point I was watching, the edge, that mattered. The crew moved to the outer section, the part that had stretched over my space from the start. They paused there a moment, checking alignment, confirming something I could not hear. Then they began to reverse what had been done, slowly, carefully. The overhang pulled back, inch by inch, returning to where it should have stayed. I felt the shift more than I saw it. The air changed, the space opened. I stepped forward slightly, watching the line clear for the first time since this started. No shadow cutting across it now, just light, clean, direct. I let out a slow breath without realizing I had been holding it. The beam that had carried the strain no longer reached into my space. It settled back into its own. The yard felt like itself again. I looked down at the ground where the marker used to be. Still bare. Still uneven. But now it mattered in a different way. It was no longer hidden. It would be replaced. It had to be. I straightened and looked up one last time as the crew secured the remaining structure within its proper line. No excess, no extension, just what belonged. I turned slightly and met Derek's gaze across the space between us. He held it for a second, then looked away. No words, no argument, just the end of something he could not hold on to. I slipped my hands into my pockets and stood there as the last of the noise faded, replaced by something quieter, something steady, the kind of silence that comes after everything has been set back where it should have been all along. I took one final look at the clean line of my yard, uninterrupted, untouched, exactly where it had always been, and that was when I realized this was never about the structure itself.